So, if you've played ARB at top tier, you know that games here can get incredibly chaotic. While it is still possible to do well if you have good positioning and situational awareness, it's much harder to perform consistently when compared to when playing at lower tiers. Because of this, there's been a lot of talk about reducing lobby sizes to try and fix this problem, and while I agree that limiting the number of players per battle would be very helpful in minimizing the chaotic element of the game, I think people aren't considering the big downside to this, that it would also make things much more difficult for players that aren't playing the optimal air-to-air role, such as if you're playing a stock vehicle, are in a full up tier, playing an air-to-ground role, or if your plane is just poorly balanced. Right now, because there are a decent number of players on each team, you can get away with flying less optimal vehicles in less than optimal ways, because there are plenty of other players on your team that the enemy could focus their attention on. So if you plan out your flight path, you can position yourself to avoid the initial confrontation so you can kill enemies who are already distracted, even if your missile loadout and plane are very bad. Or you could go after AI targets to farm RPs so that you can unlock modifications that will actually make your plane playable. But with smaller lobby sizes, each individual plane's performance becomes much more important to the team contribution because they make up a greater fraction of the team. Imagine the extreme example of if they limit the lobby sizes to 3v3. You're in a stock F104S ASA in a full up tier, you have 2 AIM-9Ls, no chaff, and even if you did have chaff, you have no directional RWR, so you can't notch anyways. You have no booster or G-suit, and even if you did, you don't turn well enough so you can't hug the ground for multipathing on most maps, or win any dogfights, and you're not nearly fast enough to outrun any 4th gen fighter, much less their missiles. At 13.0, you have planes like the F-15A, Su-27, Gripen A, AV-8B+, that could easily clap you out of the sky just by looking at you. And even at 12.0, at its own BR, there are plenty of planes that are basically impossible to engage in a 1v1, especially things like the Viggen, the F4S, Tornado, F3, and the Mirage F1C. Does it suck to fly in the current high-tier meta right now? Of course. But because there are so many other players to be focused on, you can get away with sneaking around and going for vulture kills or ground targets. In a 3v3 though, you're basically dead as soon as you spawn, you might as well return to hangar immediately. Even if you are in a full down tier in a fully spaded plane, one base bombing teammate will drastically bring down your entire team's performance, since they make up a whole 33% of your team, turning a 3v3 into a 2v2, or if you're unlucky enough to have 2 base bombing teammates, it's a 1v3. These are extreme examples of course, but it demonstrates that with smaller team sizes it makes it much less viable to play less than optimal vehicles and playstyles, whether that's because you're stock, base bombing in a full up tier, or your plane just sucks for its BR. Some of these problems can be fixed with better stock loadouts and better BR balancing, but we all know Gaijin's terrible track record with those statistics that they use to balance things, so I don't think we can rely on that. Because suboptimal vehicles won't be as usable anymore, people will naturally gravitate towards the stronger and more meta vehicles, making games very boring and repetitive. If you've played against the F5C hordes a few years ago, you know what I mean. It's incredibly frustrating to lose against superior vehicles over and over again, and the problem will only get worse with smaller teams. Plus, some nations just don't have any meta vehicles at a given rank, like how the F4EJ is still the only rank 7 tech tree plane for Japan, making grinding through them much worse. I also personally enjoy having large lobbies since it allows you to get longer games, surviving through the initial engagement, racking up a lot of kills, returning to base to rearm and re-engaging for one final duel with the best player on the enemy team to clutch out the game is simply the best feeling I've ever felt playing War Thunder. So smaller lobbies will just make games end much faster and lower the stakes. So I've just talked a lot about why I don't think it's a good idea to reduce lobby sizes. The problem of top tier being so chaotic isn't something we can just ignore though, and if we take a closer look at the problem itself, we'll find that the source of the issue isn't actually the lobby sizes itself. I mean, we have 16v60 games at prop tier, but people don't complain about how chaotic that can get. In fact, I quite enjoy having large lobby sizes at that BR, and wouldn't mind if the games were even larger there. So let's take a closer look at why large match sizes work for props and early jets, but not so much at top tier. The main source of this frustration comes from when you're dealing with multiple threats at the same time. When you get ganged up on in a 1v3, it sucks whether you're in a prop or a jet. However, at prop tier, your main weapons are guns, so it takes quite a bit of effort to line up a shot, and the enemy has a lot of options to dodge and weave if they're skilled at defensive flying. This also applies to early IR and radar missiles. While it takes little effort to launch IR missiles, it also usually takes just a few pops of flares to evade it as long as you have good situational awareness, and a plane that carries flares. Early radar missiles are also easily fooled by chaff. The reason these weapons don't feel too overpowered is that the amount of skill and effort needed to use these weapons is balanced about the same as the amount of effort needed to react and evade to these threats. The issues start to show with long-range pulse Doppler radar semi-actives and IRCCM missiles. PD missiles still require significant effort since they require an active lock to be maintained, so in a 1v1 they're not unbalanced, but missiles like the AIM-7F and R-27ER have a long range and can be launched at you even if you're not in a position to be able to defend yourself at no fault of your own. This problem feels especially unfair if the enemy sees you because you're spotted by a different enemy that you're dogfighting or an enemy AI, while you can't see where the threat is coming from at all. Still, I think most planes in the BR bracket are given enough tools to evade these semi-actives, and the amount of effort needed to maintain lock balances out with the long range and kill potential. IRCCM missiles can be rather tricky to evade and require either pre-flaring or some sort of combination of flare dumping and maneuvering, but most are rather limited in range, so other than the R-27ET, you'll likely be able to see it coming, or the enemy carrying them coming, given you time to react accordingly as long as you have good situational awareness. And then there are the active radar missiles. These are the missiles that finally break the balance between attacker and defender. The amount of effort required to launch these missiles is relatively minimal, especially if you're using TWS. While you do have to guide them into pitbull range, once they're active you don't need to do any more effort for the missile to do its thing. They have long range, can be fired beyond spotting distance, and require effort to either outrun or notch. If you're dealing with them one by one from long range, they're manageable, but it becomes borderline impossible to dodge multiple from many different angles, especially if they're launched from under 10 kilometers. If you get in a dogfight or even just get spotted, it can be a death sentence, because when you get spotted by one enemy, you get spotted by their whole team, effectively turning the game into a 1v16, and you can't even see the other 15 in most of the time. Now, there's not much we can do about this imbalance between attacker and defender without artificially gimping these weapons. In real life, the whole point of these weapons is to stack the odds in the favor of the attacker. However, it doesn't make for a very fun game experience. This is why I was in favor of keeping multipathing height at 100 meters, so that aircraft like the F-104S ASA that don't have many ways to retaliate while under attack could at least have a chance of surviving. With 60 meters, even the best maneuvering jets have a hard time consistently maintaining the right radar altitude, especially on terrain with lots of trees or buildings. This is something that could be fixed with a better BR placement, but that's beside the point. We're trying to focus on the problem that can't be solved with better BRs. Another way of artificially gimping the missiles would be to make it easier to notch and chaff, but I don't know if people would want that. I personally would not mind if active radar missiles had a wider notch band or were more susceptible to chaff, since I'm not really here for the realism or historical accuracy, but I know that a lot of people care about that kind of stuff, so I'll remove that from the list of potential solutions for now. I think then the one thing that we can do is to alter the spotting system that is currently in-game, since I think that is the main culprit in a lot of situations that we find frustrating. If aircraft guns were able to shoot and kill people from over 10 kilometers, I think people would find prop gameplay just as frustrating as top tier right now. At prop tier, the engagement range is usually under a kilometer, while you can spot people from 6 kilometers or farther with a decent crew. At top tier, the dynamic is flipped, where your spotting is still around 6 kilometers, but your missiles are potent from upwards of 30 kilometers. Obviously, you have things like radar and RWR to try and locate people, but these tools are not nearly effective enough at maintaining situational awareness, given the relative range of the weapons at this tier. So then what exactly do we do with the spotting system to make it more playable? We could just scale up the spotting distance relative to the range of weapons at the BR. So at top tier, enemies and missiles could be spotted from maybe 10 to 15 kilometers range, perhaps even farther. If this seems unrealistic, the way that this could be implemented could be using AWACS systems or ground-based radar, which could also be integrated as a part of the in-game objectives, giving ground attack aircraft and interceptors more of a role. Another potential solution could be to reduce spotting efficacy by only allowing planes that you yourself can see to be spotted. This means that if you get spotted by an enemy, his friendlies won't necessarily be alerted to your presence as long as those other enemies couldn't already see you. So this would reduce the chance of getting suddenly swarmed by missiles from every enemy like you would in the current meta. It would mean that you have to be much more vigilant about maintaining your own situational awareness, since even if you have allies behind you, an enemy could sneak up behind you and kill you if you aren't looking around. If spotting plays such a crucial role in gameplay, this could also introduce more opportunities to create interesting objectives, like ground-based radar or reconnaissance planes, instead of having every AI plane work as a spotter like it does in the current game. What's crazy is that for the first 2 days of the Firebird update, this exact solution was actually how spotting worked. It was still pretty chaotic, of course, but it was still pretty manageable. You had to consistently be vigilant to make sure that no one was sneaking up on you, and climbers couldn't just rain hell down from the stratosphere against people that were being spotted by their teammates. You had to find enemies for yourself, whether it was out of your own vision or using your own radar. Of course, this was a bug and they patched it out, but I think that's with some tweaking, this could very much improve top-tier gameplay. Some tweaks could be made to improve how the game plays, like making enemies get spotted by everyone when they got severe damaged or killed so that you know you're not firing on a corpse. There are probably other adjustments that you could make to further develop this new spotting system, but overall I think this could be a big improvement over what we have right now. There are definitely some problems that I can see potentially occurring within this system, like making it more difficult to track down the last enemy on a team when the game is already won from one side, and giving a larger advantage to people who have higher level crew points and more points in keen vision and awareness, and it could also strongly favor players who are squatted, who can actively communicate with each other. But I think that fundamentally, a change in the spotting system has a lot of potential to fix some of the issues that we see at top tier today, and could introduce a lot of opportunities for new and interesting gameplay mechanics revolving around spotting to become possible to implement. It won't fix every issue there is with ARB, but I still think that it could be a good start when it comes to starting a game mode overhaul, which I think we are sorely in need of after 12 years of basically the same ARB, which has been falling apart for years. Anyways, those are my thoughts. Let me know what y'all think in the comments. That's all for now. Bye bye.